Hello, John Birch for Love Shift and Survival Memes. And today I'd like to make a brief video about the idea of amplification. Amplification is about taking the signal that we're putting into the social media and changing the way that our thinking affects the whole living system. So here on this page, I have a simple amplifier circuit, and I'd like to just go over it with you. It'll seem kind of strange, but there's a reason why I'm doing this. So let's just look at this for a second. What you have here is this simple drawing of how an amplifier circuit works. And interestingly, you have this flow here as electrons flow from what's called the cathode to the anode, right? And this is a flow of energy. And what happens is we have this thing called the grid. And the grid is this screen in the amplifier circuit. And as you put a signal on the grid, as you put a sine wave signal on the grid, let's say it's this big, because it affects the flow, the output is a sine wave that's like this. And that's basically how the amplifier circuit works. And so what you have to do now in the world, in my opinion, is to figure out how to affect the grid, because the flow is happening. So there's a signal here. There's an actual piece of energy that we're putting on that grid. And it can vary in amplitude. It can vary in frequency. So what is the signal that we're putting on the grid? That's a good question right now. And if you look at your newspaper, your magazines, you look at the browser that you get your information online, whatever, look at the stories that are going viral and see what signal we are being willing to put on that grid. What are we doing with our voice and our energy, and what information are we willing to amplify? How are we doing that? Now, what's interesting is we're kind of in a moment here that has to do with global warming, climate change. And climate change has another feature. Besides amplification, it has what's called a feedback loop. And the feedback loop is that when the input comes in on the signal and produces the output actually reinforces the signal. And as we see that happening in the world, we see this spiraling. And what's happening is that the temperature on Earth is spiraling out of control. And that's what everybody is concerned about, right? So we've got this spiraling out of control because the feedback loop is out of control. Now here's an example of this simple climate feedbacks. We have the human release of CO2. The Earth gets hotter. And as the Earth gets hotter, then we have a looping that comes back around like this. And these feedback loops, and there's even secondary ones, and this is why the temperature on Earth is rising. Okay, so what can we do about that? How can we master the system dynamics to break the feedback loop, to modify the amplification factor, which is running our planet hot and running our chances of survival out of control? Well, the answer is that actually what has to happen is we have to put a radically different signal on the grid. The grid and the structure here is set. This is built into the universe. This is the way things work. There's a rate of change. And we have to modify this. We have to modify that little signal there. And as we modify that signal, we can then get an amplification of the output here. we can actually run the feedback loop in a virtuous way so we can get a reduction in temperature, a reduction in violence, a reduction in isolation, a reduction in all the things that are threatening ourselves and our species and humanity, including poverty, including war, including hunger, including the pollution of the oceans. So if we could see this method and recognize that there is this feedback loop and recognize that another cycle could be built that starts to run in favor of being beneficial to all life, we would actually then recognize that this model is a teaching opportunity. So the question that I pose in this little video is, what signal are we putting on that grid, and who is actually running that system? And is the individual's voice strong enough to actually modify the methodology and create a different output? And I believe, or I wouldn't be making this video, that actually one voice, one individual voice, is sufficient to modify the signal on the grid, if done correctly, to change the output of the whole living system. And then, as we've said in Love Shift and Survival Memes, that now, as collective consciousness has become the independent variable, the possibility of talking together, working together, thinking together, sharing our information and our dreams and our goals and our ideas, we can take the power of collective consciousness, put that on the grid, crank up the rate of change, and change the entire course of human history right now. So that's a very big statement, and it's a very hopeful idea, but it's built into the method of system dynamics that collective consciousness could affect the system that powerfully and that successfully. Thank you.